Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Professor Ifeoma Ajunwa from Emory University School of Law, and we will discuss her excellent paper, The Artificial Intelligence Commission. I'm super excited to discuss this paper. It's so innovative, and it's, I would say, it's something I haven't seen anything like that so far in this regulatory policy debate around AI. And thank you, Ifeoma, for joining me. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Luiza.
For the second time, right? So the previous time
Yes.
we discussed her excellent book, which is the green one at the back at her background, The Quantified Worker. And today we are talking about her proposal, this very interesting proposal. Specifically, I think it really fits the global regulatory discussion, but it's more specific to the US. But we can take there are many takeaways that would be general. It's an excellent paper. I highly recommend everyone to read it. So there is a link in the description of the video. So please read it when you have time. So let's get right to it. So my first question has to do with the best way to regulate AI. Some people say that the existing legal system of most countries can handle it. We could regulate through broad principles. We could build analogies. And the other side of this debate would be to say that regulating AI through the existing legal system or through broader principles would maybe not catch specific safety or technology specific safety issues. So maybe we need something that is technology specific, or that is describing that specific tool or describing that how it works. I would love to hear your perspective on how to reconcile that and your broader approach on regulation.
Yeah, so excellent question. And I think this question has been really at the root of, shall I say, some of the hesitancy on the part of the United States government to regulate AI. So I think a lot of why perhaps the EU has moved further and quicker is because the EU has focused on regulating AI technologies in a more specific way as they are emerging. Whereas the US, because we are a case-based legal system, we don't want to create precedent that doesn't hold up, right? So as a result, the US has been really hesitant to move forward with regulating AI because they feel that, well, these technologies are still emerging. We don't know about all the features. We don't know about all the use cases. And this has almost, I feel like, paralyzed the legal system in terms of taking action. So what I'm trying to do with this paper is really to say, we don't have to be paralyzed. We can recognize that, yes, as I know, it might feel like whack-a-mole to try to regulate specific features, but we can still take action. And that action that we take is more likely to be enduring or long-lasting if it is based on rock solid legal principles that are not going to change, right? So principles of equal protection, principles of equal opportunity, principles of due process. So I do believe that this is the right path to take for enduring change and enduring governance of AI technologies. Now, that being said, to your question of, does this then miss potential technical features? I don't think so. And the reason I say I don't think so is because when you are governing based on the on principles, then your law is flexible. Your law is amenable. So essentially, anytime there is a technical feature on emergent use that touches upon that principle, your law would still apply. So you wouldn't need to necessarily change the law or even really amend it to still use that same law. So that's why I argue that you shouldn't necessarily focus on specific technical features because they are ever changing. And whatever one you might not have contemplated, when you discover it and you then make the connection between that technical feature and a long-standing legal principle that has been the basis of your law, then the law can still have purview.
It's a fascinating approach, and I find it interesting to compare with the European approach, which is they chose to adopt a product safety framework, which is very much the opposite of that, right? So it's product specific. There are descriptions of prohibited practices, and you have to, the practice that we are trying to prohibit has to match exactly that text. So it's extremely challenging, especially as the frameworks and the tools are evolving, as you mentioned. We are going to talk about the federal, the agency that you're proposing, that is super interesting. But I want to talk about the federal AI regulation aspect that you mentioned. That I think it's super important in the US. So would the idea of this artificial intelligence commission or this federal approach impact the state's independence? How would you see the artificial intelligence commission in light of existing state laws on AI?
Right. So the law is actually well established that federal laws do preempt state laws. However, in the past, what you have seen is that federal laws set a floor, which then state laws might go beyond that floor. And therefore, federal laws and state laws might actually coexist, right? Provided that the state law does not have lower protection than the federal law, right? So you see this in health law, for example. One example I can give you is the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, right? Has its protections against genetic discrimination, and it sets the bar. And then the California law goes even above that. And both laws exist simultaneously. So that's what I'm really proposing here, right? That you have the AI Commission as setting the floor, right? For what AI governance should look like. It doesn't mean that state laws can't exist that comport with that floor and even go beyond, right? And I'm even I would even encourage that the AI Commission, in terms of its particulars, in terms of like the particular regulations and policies that it adopts, I would hope that it would look to the states, like California, like New York, that have already started to experiment with AI laws. That the federal government should look to those states as essentially a laboratory to take what is working in those states and put that into federal.
And it's interesting that currently the federal administration wants to enact a federal framework, but to preempt state efforts, right? To make kind of the floor would be a different type of floor, right? Would be kind of very soft baseline according to recent the last executive order. Realistically speaking, do you see any appetite for that type of federal framework and also the AI Commission today, or you don't see that?
I do see. I mean, I wrote this paper in response to my conversations with lawmakers. Even before this present administration, lawmakers I had spoken to had thought about, well, how do we get a good handle on the emerging AI technologies, especially at a federal level? And, some people might say, well, this is not the time for you to write this article. The current administration might be perceived as like hostile to this kind of regulation. That may be so, but I believe that my role as an academic, as a scholar, is to propose what could be, right? So legal scholars, I believe, are called upon to always move the law forward. They're always supposed to be writing about, researching about what the law ought to be, not just what it is currently. Because the idea is that the law is an ever evolving project. It's not meant to remain static. It's meant to evolve with society. So at any, I think, period in time, legal scholars should continue to work to evolve the law. They shouldn't remain complacent. They shouldn't be defeatist. They shouldn't be pessimistic either. I think we have a duty to remain optimistic and to remain ever vigilant in pushing the law.
Right. I'm happy to hear that you're optimistic.
Not to be too melodramatic here, but when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his "I Have a Dream" speech, do you think that speech was realistic in the times he gave them in? The idea of Black and white people marching hand in hand during a period of segregation, it was completely not realistic. And he even admits that in the speech. He said, though I may not see that mountain with you, right? He admits that maybe this isn't going to happen in my time, in my lifetime. But the point is to posit. The point is to create that vision, right? Even if it doesn't happen in this lifetime, at some point, the hope is that vision can then be realized. So that's what I'm doing with this.
That's beautiful. And words have power,
Yes,
right?
words
So
have
words, they
power,
can
visions have
spread,
power.
influence.
Mhm.
So also when we talk about the law and legal interpretation, we influence culture, we influence the public debate. So it's your work is essential. And I really loved, I found this article super ambitious.
Thank you.
One of the most ambitious I've read. I've been reading and tracking articles, especially in AI ethics, AI governance, and I found it fascinating. Another question about this more ambitious and optimistic approach that you bring. So you say that the federal AI regime in the US and maybe also in other countries should work together with international law efforts to govern AI. And then you wrote another article called Provenance that has explored how various international law bodies, through various legal mechanisms, could take up the mantle of regulating AI technologies across sovereign nations. I wanted to ask you, especially in light of your other paper, do you think that in light of the AI race, and we have export control, when we have a lot of competition, we have mainly the US and China, but now the EU also aims to be the winning player, or whatever winning means. Do you think this global AI governance approach is realistic today and it's possible?
That's an important question. And I think for me, this is why I criticize the AI race, right? Because for me, ultimately, the AI race is not serving humanity. Because, and this is in my other article, AI and Captured Capital, right, is where I really, try to open people's eyes as to what the AI race is actually doing. What the AI race is doing is it's creating a race to the bottom when it comes to AI safety, when it comes to having safeguards, when it comes to actually creating the governance, right? Taking time to deliberately create the laws that will make the AI work for humans. So I very much am critical of the AI race. I think the countries participating in the AI race are setting themselves up for potential disaster because it is very much encouraging AI developers to move fast and break things. And unfortunately, with the scale of AI, the thing that could be broken is literally the entire world. So I think we need to stop the AI race and we actually need to think about working collaboratively to create AI that will benefit all of humanity. And I think actually that is so possible. It is possible to do that. If you think about all the money, all the manpower that go into AI development in separate countries, siloed, and these countries are replicating their efforts, right? So we had, Claude developed in the US, and then what's the other one? DeepSeek developed in China. They could have worked collaboratively to create just one system that actually works better than either system, if you think about it. And think about all the resources that could have been saved, right? AI development uses like massive amounts of water, creates pollution. So this AI race is unfortunately very, very damaging actually for society.
I have two follow-ups based on what you said. So there were a few petitions to stop AI development.
I'm more of a middle approach. I am in favor of deliberate and careful AI development. I am not in favor of, breakneck speed of AI development with, reckless disregard for potential dangers, both safety, but also bigger dangers, such as to the environment, to the climate. So I am in favor of, yes, we want to pursue knowledge. Yes, we want to pursue scientific progress, but let's do it responsibly. It doesn't have to be a
And
breakneck speed.
And connecting to what you said before, also, there is a question of what winning the AI
Exactly.
race actually is, right? So if we build an analogy, let's imagine that there was a social media race. What would winning a social media race look like? So you would build very many, so all the interface would be as manipulative as possible to keep people hooked, and infinite scrolls and even more tools to keep people coming back, and perhaps spending
Right.
money also on social media and
So
all sorts of
that
that's
raises a
how
question,
winning would
right?
look.
So in this AI race, are we racing towards essentially human obsolescence, right? Is the AI race actually all about making humans replaceable, disposable, right? And if so, then maybe we want to opt out of this race and create a different approach, right? So yeah, that is a good question. What are we racing towards? Everybody's focused on winning
And
the race, but we haven't actually asked ourselves, what is the destination?
how the world looks like when someone has won the whatever
Exactly.
winning meaning.
What is the end result? What is the destination? What is the trophy that we're winning for this race? And do we
And
actually
when I
want
was
it?
and that makes me reminds me of the conversation with Woodrow Hartog and Jessica Silber. So we were, and I remember Woodrow at some point said, but human nature will not change. And what is something crazy, and I told him at the time, and I'll mention it again. There are some people who, when we are talking about human obsolescence, there are some people the AI industry whose plan is
Yeah,
to make us merge with
yeah,
machines, right? So they
yeah,
say, well, humans, if you get AI and a human, AI is superior. It's a superior intelligence, superior cognitive power. So maybe we should merge. Maybe whatever is biological human is inferior. Is we don't necessarily need that. Why we can choose. So in a way, when we optimize, right, for winning the race, we will get to that point, right? Everything, when we optimize for engagement, we saw what happened. So when we optimize for winning the race, probably we will end up, well, it's difficult to foresee, but in dystopian scenarios, you'll probably end up merging with AI, and then everybody's AI. And they really say it will be much better to interact with AI if we implant AI in our brains, because then we will understand how AI thinks. So it's beyond human obsolescence, right? It's transforming us into something else, because what is human is so, I'd say, inferior, or
yeah. And I think, we have to ask ourselves, like, because we are humans, right? We are humans. Do we want to live in a world where our way of thinking is just considered inferior, right? Do we want to live in a world where we feel we have to augment ourselves to the point where perhaps we're not actually recognizable as human anymore? I think those are questions we need to ask, and that's just it. Like, what is this AI race? You know, racing towards? What are we racing towards?
and what is crazy sometimes when I'm talking about AI, it feels like we are talking about aliens or some, and unfortunately there are people calling AI aliens. I saw Yuval Noah Harari, right, in the World Economic Forum, saying that AI is alien intelligence, and there are other intellectuals, other authors also saying this, that it's alien. And this idea of privilege, and I've been discussing that when we see Claude's constitution, right? Anthropic wrote a constitution. There is this new constitutional approach to AI. So the AI has this training document that has principles and values and morals, and it will be kind of injected through the training process, and it will come out through the outputs. I wanted to ask your thoughts, and I've written about that, and I want to hear your opinion. So my personal view on that is that maybe the intentions are good. They're trying to build on AI alignment and try to teach good principles to the model. But when you read and I analyze Claude's constitution, you see that what is being built that is this, I'll say, idealization of AI. So they at some point, Anthropic wrote, for AIs and humans to flourish together, as if we are replacing the human constitution. So it would that there would be a lower system, or not so important system, which is the human constitution and the
Yeah,
legal system. And then there is something that is de facto much more powerful, which is the AI constitution, which will influence directly millions or billions of people with the values that Anthropic or whatever other AI company chose
Exactly.
to infuse in that system.
That's
So I
yeah,
wanted to hear your
there
thoughts.
you hit the nail on the head. So I've literally written, I would say, 4 law review articles making this point over and over, which is it is so dangerous for us to forget that artificial intelligence is not wholly artificial, and also even to use words like alien intelligence when it comes to AI, because what that is doing is obscuring that there is someone creating that AI, right? So we must always remember that. Why must we always remember that there is someone creating the AI? We must, because that tells us the values of that AI. If you know the person who created the AI, then you know the values that have been embedded in that AI. So the point is, when we all quote unquote become half AI, right? We're not suddenly, artificial beings. What we are, however, is subordinated to the values of whoever created that AI, right? We basically will lose our willpower, right? We will lose our autonomy, and we will be subordinated to whatever values the person that created that AI deems important, right? Deems of, relevance. So I think that's why it's so important that we never lose sight. Artificial intelligence is created by humans. And the important thing there is, what are the values of those humans? Right. So that's essentially what we're saying when we ask what are we racing towards? We're asking, what is the value? What is the sort of ethos that we're embodying with this AI race? What are we trying to achieve as a society?
And it's always refreshing to talk with legal scholars who seem to have clarity about that. We understand how the legal system works, and it has a broader societal, even philosophical role. And words matter also in law and in philosophy and in culture. Words matter. So, however we call the phenomenon, it will influence how people think about it. And I think also I've been discussing this online. So AI is a tool, and from many legal perspectives, including the European, it's being regulated as under product safety law. So it's a product. There is a manufacturer, which is called a provider, the company developing it, and it is developing a product that is a regulated product. And if this product causes harm, there will be accountability. There should be legal responsibility. There is a framework for
Yes,
that.
yes.
And when we start talking about alien intelligence,
Exactly.
legal personhood, and we are indirectly we are diluting this existing
Exactly.
framework, which is our control.
Exactly.
It's our basically only tool left to control it.
Exactly. Yeah. So, a lot of this talk of like, AGI, alien intelligence, a lot of legal scholars do see it as a smokescreen. They see it as a way to attempt to escape liability for some of the foreseen and perhaps unforeseen problems that can arise from AI development and deployment. And the thing is, like, we, if anything, we should see AI as children, right? And just like a parent is responsible if their child goes into a store and knocks something off the shelves and breaks it, similarly, the developers of this AI should be held responsible, right? It just goes without saying that you can't just escape responsibility by attempting, fancy wordplay of like what your AI system is doing. So yeah, that's a really important point to raise.
And it's funny that you mentioned children. It reminded me of Geoffrey Hinton's recent quote. I don't know if you saw it. He said that, I think it was last year, that we should teach maternal instincts to AI. So it's the opposite,
Interesting.
right? So we should teach maternal instincts so that then AI would not destroy
Very
us. So just to
interesting.
build this
Very
kind
interesting.
of no, in a critical sense. So many people said, well, it's not even alien now, it's our mother, right? We are teaching instinct so that it doesn't kill us, but just to build a funny parallel. And on that, and about the control and the power that AI companies have. So recently there was that dispute between Anthropic and the Department of War. What I've been arguing, I wanted to hear your thoughts, is that we shouldn't need to rely on the CEO, right? Why? Okay, today is Dario Amodei, and today he's doing the right thing, and we are endorsing him. But what if there is $1 billion dispute to go to the other way, and then he changes his opinion? So we are going to be begging Dario Amodei to do something different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think for me, this is underscoring the need for well thought out AI governance. Because you're right, you should not be dependent on an individual CEO who may be there one day and not there the next day, right? Because, look at what happened with OpenAI, for example. At one point, Altman was voted off, right? And he came back, in some obscure manner. But the point is, AI governance is the responsibility of the state, period. It's ultimately not the responsibility of the corporation doing the AI development itself. I mean, we would like them, of course, right, to be, careful stewards of like the technologies that they're developing. We would like that. But ultimately, the responsibility lies with the state. We have this social contract, right, as citizens, where we pay taxes, we agree to follow laws, and in return, we are sort of giving over our rights to take private action to the state to protect us from all these bigger harms that we cannot protect ourselves against, right? So these corporations are very powerful in terms of like their economic heft, such that no individual consumer can really take them on. That's where the state comes in. The state comes in its governance of these companies, with actual rules and regulation, having an actual commission, right, that can go after companies, that can impose fines, can even impose, if needed, penalties, criminal penalties, right? So that's what we need. We need governmental regulation. It can't just be left to the corporations to regulate themselves. The responsibility is ultimately with the state.
And I think that's that vision of the role of the state and the role of the legal system and the role of federal agencies. Usually, more with legal scholars have that clarity, and I think most people are not aware, or they are not used to seeing the world that way. I think it's very helpful at this point to understand how the role. Self-regulation might be helpful, might be a side, an additional tool, but it should not be the only thing happening, right?
Exactly.
So
It can't be. It really can't be.
And I want to move to the AI Commission, the Artificial Intelligence Commission that you're proposing. So first, what would be the first step to create this? Now, let's imagine now that many people will listen to our talk, and I know that there are lawmakers, policymakers subscribing to my newsletter, so they will get inspired. They will say, let's do it. So how would we start doing that?
The first would be for a lawmaker, picking up this law review article and then using it as a blueprint, a launching pad to then write the law, right? So they would then use this law review article as a starting point to actually write the text of an act that they would then attempt to pass through Congress. There's a funny little, like, this is how it's like a cartoon for kids about this is how a bill goes through Congress. It's long and complicated, but essentially it all starts with a lawmaker. It can be one lawmaker working, independently, or it could be several lawmakers, from the Senate working together in a group. But the point is, there is this text, this bill, it's BILL, this bill that is then presented to Congress and then obviously has to pass both houses, both the House and the Senate. And then it becomes, it gets signed into law, right? So it is a process. It's not you click your hand and it happens. But because, one lawmaker can't do this on their own, essentially. One lawmaker can start this, but they will still need the buy-in of all the other lawmakers to, vote for this bill, right? And then, of course, uh, the executive branch also has to sign it into law, right? So there is a process.
And you even propose the titles of and the text of these laws, right? So the lawmakers watching this talk, so
Yeah,
you
it's a
just
blueprint,
have to
right?
do it.
It's for me, I'm seeing this as like this is a launching pad that I'm giving lawmakers. I know that there are several lawmakers that have already had this idea and maybe ruminated on how do we regulate AI? What are the different mechanisms? And this is one mechanisms that you can actually like grab onto, and you now have a blueprint to do if you choose to.
And I want to talk more about the proposal for the AI Commission. Are there other cases or precedents
Yeah,
of this hierarchical relationship between agencies? So this is one thing. And could there be issues? So, for example, the FTC last year started investigating AI companies, right? So finally, after the leak, Meta's leak over AI practices and children, the FTC started investigating. So if this AI Commission agency was already there, so how would be this interaction? Would it affect the investigative powers of the FTC, which I think in previous years, and there are many interesting cases of successful investigation. So how would be this in
right.
practice?
So the idea that it is a coordinative agency, and it would essentially work in collaboration with the other agencies. So if let's say the FTC is investigating, an AI issue or use case, it wouldn't necessarily mean that the FTC could not or would have to stop. It would mean that the FTC would have to consult with this new agency, to ensure that it is investigating and proceeding in a manner that makes sense with the purview and with the regulations and rules that this other agency, the AI Commission has put forth, right? So you can see the hierarchy as, not a straight line down, but like more of a dash. But essentially, the AI Commission has purview over anything AI, with the understanding that, of course, AI things can be embedded in other issues as well, like obviously consumer protection, which is a big purview for the FTC. Now, you asked, is there like corollaries in history, examples of this? Yeah, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is actually kind of a coordinated agency, because the Environmental Protection Agency puts forth regulations that might still impact, for example, the Transportation Commission. Like, so let's say the EPA puts forth a ruling about what emissions cars could have, for example. So they don't directly, you know, regulate cars, but the agency that regulates cars does have to pay attention to what the EPA has set in terms of the emissions, uh, threshold, right? That the EPA has determined is, that cars should be held to, for example. So that's just one example of
Great.
agencies having those sort of coordinative powers and I guess collaborative powers as well.
You mentioned also Title II of the proposed AI Commission would be focused on the government's use of AI. I found that part excellent, super interesting. And we don't hear a lot about that. And I wanted to ask you, there is this growing trend, and even last week I was writing about that. So the Chinese government is one example. Well, it's a different political system, but I would just say they have this very ambitious goal of AI penetration. I think it's 90% penetration in Chinese government by
Yeah, yeah.
2030. The United Arab Emirates also have recently announced that I think it's 50% of all governmental activities are already run by AI agents or
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
AI frameworks. So there is this trend, and many are saying, when I read the announcement, I think by the UAE, also they said that it's supposedly is to bring efficiency, to help the government to be more efficient. So how do we think about regulating the government's use of AI and potential benefits to society. So how would you
Yeah.
correlate those two?
So, several legal scholars have actually written about AI use as part of government. So, this Government by Algorithm, which was a report written by Catherine Sharkey, uh, David Freeman Engstrom, Dan Ho, and a few others. And David Freeman Engstrom and Dan Ho have written also extensively. So it is documented that the government in the United States is already making use of AI as part of its official functions. So anything from the Postal Service to the IRS, actually, I think people will be shocked to hear this. IRS is making use of AI, especially in terms of determining what um, what tax returns should be flagged for fraud. So obviously quite a big deal for that. um so my point in with that title too is that when government is making use of AI, this is actually I think one of the most pressing areas we should focus on. The reason being that whereas, right, you can say that consumer AI is opt-in, right? You can opt out. You can just opt in or opt out. You can just say, I'm not going to use
Stop
AI,
your
as part of, like, let's say my phone or my computer or whatever service. This is not the case when government is making use of AI, because the way that governmental agencies are already making use of AI, first of all, the public is unaware. So there's not public knowledge. And then second of all, the public has not been asked their consent. So essentially, as citizens, we are subject to this AI use without our knowledge or consent. So that, I think, makes this an even more pressing problem than the consumer AI problem, because we are essentially subject to this AI technologies unknowingly. So for me, I think when government is making use of AI, you have several legal doctrines implicated. The first one is due process, meaning, should I not know when AI is being used for my governmental functions? And given that AI is being used for my governmental functions, should I not know what are the risks? What are the limitations, right? Essentially, due process, procedural due process does have this element of notice, and that's missing right now when governmental agencies is making use of AI. They're not telling you, you're not getting the notice. And then also due process has this element of, is substantive due process has this element of, does this process actually work, right? So when government is making use of AI, I should know, what is the failure rate? Does this process actually work? And if so, if it doesn't work, then I should be able to make a demand that they stop using that process. That's substantive due process, right? And then finally, there's also the issue of equal protection. So the equal protection doctrine is implicated when governments make use of AI, because the question is, we know that AI has bias. This has been demonstrated over and over. There's ample evidence out there. Now, some people might quibble and say, well, humans have bias too. And I'm like, yes, and not the point. The point is, AI systems have bias. So when you're making use of AI systems, the question is, are you sure that AI system is treating all groups equally? Because if not, then you're violating the equal protection doctrine, right? So that for me is why this had to be like Title II of the act, because I think that's frankly the most pressing use case for AI, is when it's part of the governmental functions or governmental operations.
It reminded me of Dr. Joy Boulamini's paper, if you
Mm-hmm.
remember,
Yeah.
from with Jarovsky, 2018, right? So facial recognition is not 100% accurate, and there are different accuracy rates
On
depending on
groups.
skin
Yeah.
color and
Mm-hmm.
gender. So this, from a constitutional perspective, if a human was doing that, wouldn't be legal. So why, when the AI is doing that, we just say, yes, AI is biased, right? AI is not 100%
Yeah,
accurate.
yeah, yeah.
So that's a very
Yeah,
important point. And building on what you said too, so there is an additional layer, which is the explainability difficulty, which maybe it's not even possible to solve.
right.
So you have a decision made by
Mm-hmm,
AI, and
mm-hmm.
then you'll say, okay, the part of this procedural due process, I want to argue against it.
Right,
I think
right,
it
right.
was biased.
Yeah, legal
Then
scholars like
it's very
Margaret
limited, right?
Kaminsky have written about this idea of a right to contestation. But how can you contest something that A, you don't even know is happening, and then B, they can't even explain to you how it's happening? That's an issue, right? So that's an issue.
I think it's one of my favorite quotes, that when you talk about innovation versus regulation, it's such an ongoing
It
debate.
is.
The anti-regulation camp seems to be conflating innovation with novelty. For them, anything new is innovation. Thus, any novel AI technology created would qualify as an act of innovation. However, as some scholars have argued, innovation is not merely novelty. Implicit in the definition of innovation is the idea that the new product or service is useful and beneficial for society. Thus, true innovation means new, useful, and beneficial. With this appropriate definition of innovation in mind, some emerging AI technologies may not qualify as innovative, and there is no harm in society seeking to prevent deleterious technologies from ever entering the marketplace. So it made me remember one of the apps that was popular. Now they discontinue. So OpenAI launched Sora 2, which was an AI feed, right? So AI generated videos only, so you could only post AI generated videos. And the most popular video in the first week after they launched was a fake CCTV footage of someone stealing from a market. And then that was the most liked, most popular video. So you see, that's the type of tool we are creating. So is it novel? Probably yes. Is it innovative? Is it a demonstration of innovation? Maybe we don't want it.
Yes.
Are we? That's why we're damaging the environment for this, to make a social media even
Yeah.
worse. So when I found it amazing, fascinating, and really is almost a compass to your quote and this new approach to innovation. I found it super helpful to some of those public debates in AI.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you surfacing that quote because I do think it's so important. Um, this debate, of innovation versus regulation, it is such a regulatory dodge. I think, the legal scholar Julie Cohen, she was one of the first to call it exactly what it is, which is a regulatory dodge. It's a way that, corporations can say, well, we're creating innovative products. You can't regulate us because then you're going to stymie our innovation. You're going to suppress all these new things that we're trying to do for society. And you just pointed out, right, the sort of like ludicrous uh you know um the sort of ludicrous AI that has been created and which no one can actually claim to be good for society, right? So a fake CCTV video, I mean, not only is it not good for society, I would say it's actually quite deleterious to society. So this is something that I really address head on in my other article, Provenance. So the idea that we have AI technologies that can create video and images and sound of people talking, doing things that they didn't really do, not only is this not innovative in terms of being actually useful to society, but it's actually going to harm society in a very, very fundamental way, in a very, very deeply problematic way. And what I mean by that is when you allow such products, and I'm glad that OpenAI eventually disbanded that project. But when you allow such, quote unquote innovation to flood the market, what's going to happen is then you're then going to have a flood of synthetic images and content and video. And it's going to be such a deluge that the ordinary citizen now cannot believe anything they see, right? So imagine you go online and you basically feel, oh, everything is fake. How can people have discourse? How can you even have an exchange of ideas if anytime you're interacting with someone, you think, oh, they're probably a bot? You see? It starts to erode societal trust. It starts to erode societal cohesion because now you don't even trust reality. Now there's no shared reality. People are like, well, I think that's fake. Well, I think that's real. It's so poisonous to societal cohesion and unity. So that's my point with that quote. My point is we shouldn't just accept anything new, right? Just because it's new doesn't mean it's good. Just because it's new doesn't mean it's innovation. So when we are proposing regulation against something new, we shouldn't be seen as enemies of progress, right? I shouldn't be seen as anti-technology because I'm against technology that's bad for society. No, I'm against anything that's bad for society, technology or otherwise. I am pro technology that's good for society, right? So I think that is just a fundamental normative stance that we really have to hold on to.
And we are unfortunately already seeing what you described, right? So you open social media, you see a video that is clearly AI. Many people, they don't know how AI works, or they see, wow, the video has 1 million views and has
Right.
2,000 comments and 10,000 likes. So it is absurd, yes, but maybe it is real. And many people, I would say, especially the elderly or
Exactly.
people with disabilities and specific vulnerable groups, it is a new reality. Now I would say we are already living that reality of
Unfortunately.
what is true and what is not true, even in the political
Hmm.
sense, right? So I would say 3 years ago, the videos still had glitches, right? You could say, you see the shade,
Hmm.
the discontinuity. Now is not possible. Is extremely realistic. Probably you have to be an auditor to
Yes.
check if it's AI or not with your eyes. So society is already living that
Yeah.
challenge. So we are, I would say, at the beginning of the erosion. How it will, if we don't do anything, how it will look like in 10 or 20 years, right? So when nobody knows what is true or not, when people, even when people start, and you mentioned the delusion and the lack of, so we don't know if it's about or not. And we could also bring the topic that you mentioned chatbots also in the paper. So people interacting with chatbots, and we are also seeing mental health harm and delusion. So it's almost this. So delusion in different ways is happening in many places. I want to ask you, as a professor, so do you use AI? Do you integrate it, AI, in any way in your teaching? What are you feeling from the younger generation
Right.
now?
Yeah. So I do use AI. I actually believe that some AI can be useful, but I'm very careful in how I use AI. I don't delegate my thinking to AI. That's, I think, crucially important. Um, I think, unfortunately, with the younger generation, a mistake that they make is to start with AI. What that does is, however, is you're not working your brain. Your brain is just like any other muscle in your body. If you don't work it, it will atrophy. It will not, improve and be strong. So I'm very careful not to delegate my thinking to AI. So I don't use AI for thinking. I don't start with AI. The kind of duties, if you will, that I delegate to AI are more like mundane, sort of tedious kind of tasks, but never my thinking, never like constructing my papers, none of that, because I actually like that I'm able to think and construct arguments and create, you know, ideas. And once I start delegating that, I will lose that ability. And that would be sad for me, right? And for society, right? So that's, I think, important to know. I do incorporate AI. I have in the past incorporated AI and will continue to incorporate AI in my teaching, mainly because I want my students to be AI literate. So at Emory Law School, I was part of a committee that created the AI concentration, which means that law students at my law school can take a series of classes in AI and law and graduate with a certificate denoting that they have, some measure of AI literacy and competency. So in my classes, I do talk about AI use. I do introduce my students to AI tools. And I, more importantly, walk them through how to use those tools ethically, right? How to use those tools in ways that are not going to be against, uh, academic conduct. Um, so I think it is important that we don't just ignore these tools, right? It is important that we are engaging with them and, in fact, maybe contributing to make them better. So if I am asking ChatGPT to do something and it does it wrong, for example, I correct it. So it's not enough to just say, oh, ChatGPT is wrong, Claude is wrong. What have you contributed to make it better? Right? Ask yourself that. In the ways that you interact with any of these AI technologies, do you feel that you make them better? I think that is also a responsibility on the part of the consumer, to we're all beta, like, let's be real, we're all beta testers for these technologies, right? Because they're being released without any kind of extensive beta testing. So that's how I see myself. And I take that as a responsibility to make sure that I'm correcting any sort of issues that I see as well. But yeah, that's my response. And in terms of optimism, what I can say to the next generation, as they contemplate the AI revolution, and how is this going to look for my education, how is this going to look for when I enter the job market. I think the first thing is not to throw in the towel. Like, I see people saying, well, AI is going to take all our jobs anyway. No, I don't think that's going to happen in any near future. So AI is going to perhaps be able to do a lot of things, but there's still a lot of things that AI is not going to be able to do, right? So I think my advice for people is, do get your education. That education should include, yes, AI competency, AI literacy, but it should also very much include the hard topics. And by that, I mean the humanities, the social sciences, right? Those human topics that, frankly, AI is still not very good at. The ability to dissect an argument, the ability to construct an argument, the ability to write persuasively, given your understanding of your audience, the ability to read and exercise critical thinking as you're reading, in terms of, like, who's speaking, in terms of this writing, what are their sources, can I believe this, is there bias embedded? That is all, those are all still human skills that we will need no matter what. So I think a lot of colleges can teach you that. And I think you can also learn that on your own by reading extensively. I think reading is something that is unfortunately falling out of favor, but we still actually need to continue to do. So that's my advice for the younger generation.
That's an excellent way to conclude our conversation. I love everything that you said, and when you brought the brain, in the past we were hunter gatherers, right? So now that we stay the whole day in the computer, we need to go to the
Exactly.
gym if we want to live long lives. We need to force ourselves to be like a mouse in the
Yeah.
treadmill and lift weights. So with the brain, it will probably be
Yeah.
similar, right? So far we've been
Yeah.
doing things to our brain. Now AI is automating cognition in so many levels. Maybe we will get to we will need in a few, maybe it sounds crazy now, but maybe in 10, 20 years you will have to go to a brain gym, right, to
To
exercise
exercise our brain.
our
Yeah.
cognitive. I hope we don't get to that point. Thank you so much, Professor Ifeoma, for joining me today. This was excellent. I found your paper fascinating.
Thank
One of
you.
the best. Well, there isn't nothing to compare to it. So the framing, especially from a US perspective, it should be read by not only people in the US, but people in other
Oh, thank
countries who
you.
are helping to draft their laws or helping to think about a regulatory approach and an effective one that could help make companies accountable and properly
Oh,
regulate AI. So thank you so
thank
much
you.
for
Thank you
joining
so
me.
much. This has been so wonderful. I just want to, praise you for being such a trailblazer in creating this type of platform to discuss, AI issues that are so relevant to society. So I really want to applaud the work that you're doing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It means a lot coming from you, Ifeoma. Really,
Yeah.
really happy. And to the audience, please don't miss Professor Ifeoma's paper. So the AI, Artificial Intelligence Commission. So please read it. I will add the link to the comments. And I see everyone in the next episode.
Bye
Bye bye.
bye.